last-minute substitutions, but we still have some great people. The topic here was the myths and reality of email in a mobile age. So we thought we'd start talking a little bit about app messaging and how that works, what it can be used for and what it can't be used for. And we thought maybe we'd start with, how does it work?
Sure. So I'd probably tell you who I am so we can, so you sort of know where this is coming from. So I built the P90X app, so that's from a few moments ago, that's us. We also do Bloomberg's work, so that's Business TV and Bloomberg TV, ESPN, Score Center, and Watch ESPN, HBO, 11 NHL teams, the Knicks. So not a lot of people know who we are, but we work, I would say, almost only with Fortune 500 companies doing their flagship native apps. So we've sort of carved out a special little niche there since we did the Times at the start of the App Store. So I think that's where we're coming from. And in terms of messaging, a lot of our clients basically use us to figure all of that out for them when it comes to native and how to do all of that. So that's probably a good, just a quick intro. And then why don't you intro yourself, and then we'll go into the...
Yeah, so you guys know me as Dennis Damon with Eloqua. However, I'm changing hats today. I'm a partner as well in a venture capital fund in Dallas. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've been kind of rolling out, obviously, our accelerator fund, teaching new kids, if you will, or startups how to build businesses. And in the last 2 years, a big portion of our budget or the money that we're investing has been going into the mobile side of things, iPhone apps and iPad apps and all that kind of stuff. I think we've as an organization have realized that this is the next medium right now. I mean, it is really hot for us. And as we've been investing in companies, they're continuing to get more backing and huge adoption, across the consumer base. So I'm going to hopefully give a little bit of a kind of a viewpoint in terms of how we see this and a little bit about why I put the panel together originally.
All right, so now I'll go back to that question, which is probably good for, I think, people like in this particular segment that are in this room to understand the, let's call it just the basics of how this works on an app platform. So I'm going to talk about Apple primarily because that's the platform you essentially only care about at the moment, unless you care about a little bit about Android, but I'm not going to debate that today. We do work for both, but the numbers are always horrific on Android anyway. So you would take the message that you want to do. There's lots of tools out there that will do a composer, or maybe it's going to be generated by some trigger that you've set. You actually take that, you send that to Apple, and then Apple is the one that does that end delivery to the device. So you don't actually have a direct communication with that person, and I think that's important for everyone here to know. I think it's important to know that when you send that message, you get to do a few things. You get to send your message, which is what pops up on the phone, the action, which is what do you want it to do when it opens, and you can only have one action, right? So it's not like emails where you can have multiple calls to action. This is one message, one action. A sound, which I would say is underused to a huge way. I mean, when we do ESPN's work, when you hear that ba-na-na-na-na in a bar when somebody scores, I know exactly how many people are using my app in that room. Like it's and especially when they're all going off at the same time during playoffs. And then finally, like basically it's called the payload, and that is what we're actually going to do with that message. So, for example, we did TMZ's app. That was our most recent release. Launched it the next day. I find out that Dick Clark died from this app, right? So kind of a sad way to get my first push, but it was, it sort of shows like the way all of this flows around. Now, lots of other stuff happened that day, but Dick Clark dying was worth being pushed for, so they sent that out. So that sort of goes to like, that's how this works. It's super personal, and it's going to be for each person. So I think the other thing to know about like what you don't know is, here's the shocker, you don't get to know anything about them, right? You don't get to know their email address. You don't get to know their name. You don't get to know who they are. You have no identifier other than a number. And in fact, recently even that was abstracted from you. So now you get to know a number of that your app was installed on that device this time, meaning if they install it, delete it, and install it again, they're going to appear to you as a new person. So that's going to muck with your data. And I think that's really good for all you guys to know in here. You're used to like getting an email address and sort of getting to have a lot more personal knowledge of who these people are. In the app world, you get to know a ton about them, like so much, except for who they are. I know where you are, I know where you work, I know where you go, I know what you do, I don't know who you are, right? So that's a big deal.
Yeah,
so I was going to say, so we were talking a little bit as well about the messaging. You were saying you can do sound, but there are some limitations, right? The amount of copy you can provide is limited, and the number of call to actions is limited. There has to be one, only one, no more, no less, and it has to be very specific.
Yeah.
And 180 characters, right?
Yeah, it's 180 characters for the message that you get to send. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in some regards, you could think about it a little bit as it's like SMS, but with a little more capability to it.
Yeah, because I think like this message you get, like when I get the message says Dick Clark died, and when I open it, I see the video from TMZ of their whole bit. Right, so it goes directly to content you talked about. And I would say if you're smart, a lot of apps don't do that. They just sort of blast you into the app. That's ridiculous. If your team's doing that, tell them to do a better job. It should have a payload that goes directly to your message, right?
You talk about the badge.
I'm talking about the badge
right.
and the notification. It should go right to what you were talking about and not just be open my app. Like that's the equivalent of sending an email and just having it open to your home page instead of to the content, right?
And that's what bothers me about Facebook, right? I don't know if you guys use Facebook on your iPhone, but it gives you a notification, and you slide that over, it's taking you into the app to get all the other information. I'd like for it to tell me Ryan Feynman liked this comment and what the comment was that he liked versus me having to go all the way into the app, to look at that, right? Yeah. I mean, I love, it's funny, as I look at mobile apps nowadays, and I have a completely different view, and my wife is my example all the time, but she gets excited, when she hears that sound, she looks at the iPhone, and again, we're iPhone users, sorry Android users, but she sees that little round red number 1 or number 2, and she gets really, really excited, right? And that's telling her, hey, there's something going on here. Go after this, do this, right? It's almost kind of drawing. I mean, it's hypnotizing when you see that one number in there. But you make a point earlier that, not every app is using email, right? One of the companies that we invested in, Keyring, use it if you want, but they actually ask for an email address, right, as you sign up. Now, probably about 90%, if you will, of the interaction to their systems is through this app. Coupons, loyalty cards. They will send out emails to you saying, hey, by the way, there's a new coupon at Tom Thumb. It's now in your app, so when you go scan this app, which has your barcode in it, you now have a redeemable coupon. But outside of that, they're not doing any big marketing. I mean, it's a very simplistic email. Hey, go check your app again. Now, I'm trying to decide whether or not they should convert that over to a notification, a badge notification. I don't know. It's trying to figure that out.
If that's all it is, then probably.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, what they're hoping though is that they might be able to open this up as a communication channel, and maybe potentially sell that data to another marketer or something, right? But no.
Yeah, I think one thing to worry about there, like we worry about all the time, is Apple is a closed system, and you do have to behave by their rules, right? There's no option to it. If you want to play in the gray area, their first response is reject. So know that right off the bat. One of the things you just said was, needing an email address to sort of get in to use it. Now, that makes sense for applications like Facebook on there where it's an external account and everything like that. One of Apple's rules is you can't use an email address as currency, and you can't use an email address as a roadblock. You can't come into the app and say, I'll give you other something because, or I need your email address to continue. That's an immediate rejection from the App Store. So, yeah, like it's...
Which ties in a little bit, I guess, to the subject the conversation we had the other day, which was came as a little bit of a surprise to me, how draconian Apple is about what messaging you can and cannot send through app notifications, and how fine some of the parsing is about what is and isn't allowed. Yeah. Clearly, we were talking about the fact that they say you mustn't send any marketing or advertising. But then you had some great examples of what you can and what you can't say, and how fine those distinctions are. Could you speak to that a little?
Yeah, I think what I'll do is first, I'm going to directly quote the developer guidelines, because you have to be a developer to see these, and I expect a lot of people in here haven't read these rules.
I hadn't.
Yeah. Okay, so apps that use push notifications to send unsolicited messages will be rejected. That's like one. And here's the one applicable to this room. Apps cannot use push notifications to send advertising, promotions, or direct marketing of any kind. None of it. Okay, let that shock kind of settle in there. I see. Yeah. So when you see apps out there that send you messages, and there are ones that are bending these rules or in the gray area right now, I think ones like the Guild Group and stuff are good examples of that. So applying these rules to real life means that you can say the sale starts now. What that means is what you can't say, these shoes are $35. That's the gray area distinction here. So I think that's the big thing about this is you're misusing push if you think that it's for a direct messaging about like a particular product. And I think the daily deals and stuff, those are the ones that are most in the gray area and get the most bashing from Apple because they're like, you could say, you know, your new deals are ready, but you can't say 35% off this particular spa today. Right? If you do, and the thing is, you control this messaging. They don't look at it on all the time. What happens is they just wait for the first person to complain, and then what they do is they pull down your app, and then you have to prove that you're going to do better next time, and that can take weeks to months. If you don't know anybody at Apple, it could take 10 to 14 weeks to come back. If you know somebody, it can be minutes, but depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing, too. I mean, just a show of hands, how many here in their companies, and USA Today, we definitely know you guys have got one because I love their app. How many of you guys actually have an app, whether it's Android, iPhone, iPad, whatever? How many of you guys actually have one? Okay. So one of the things that we were talking about last night is I find, in the last 2 years, I forgot who we were talking to, maybe it was you and I, Morgan, but in the last, or 2-3 years ago, everybody was jumping on this app bandwagon. They were all going out and building something. I got to have an app, And what we're now seeing, in fact, I was kind of one of these app whores, if you will, where I had, like Ryan Phelan, he's got 10 pages of apps, right? I was exactly like that, and I realized a lot of these things, I wasn't really using them, I wasn't interacting with it, and I began to realize, well, wait a minute, these guys have developed an app, but they're not really doing anything with me. Did they really need that app, and did I really need to go download that app? What I'm finding now is that companies who are going, God, should we get an app now? Is this the next thing? Maybe not. I mean, if you're not doing things, if you're not interacting with that user like USA Today, does with me, don't bother with the app then. Maybe that's not the channel that you should be using to interact with your customer, right?
Yeah.
Well, I want to say, I think USA Today does a great job with their pushes.
Yes.
I think the Times does a great job with their pushes, right? So, I remember, when we were working on the Times, and then, Michael Jackson died, and you get a push for that, and then you look at what's in the Times, and you're realizing you haven't got a push in 3, maybe 4 weeks. That's the threshold for the Times sending a push to all their users is so high. And it's the same with Bloomberg. The threshold is super high before they'll send you a push that if you didn't opt into a particular story and things like that global message just doesn't happen because of the blowback you get from that. And we talked about this yesterday, so let's talk about what happens when you do that blowback, right? So all apps have the ability, basically if users are, call it incrementally savvy, they can just go into the settings, and what they do is they can just sort of globally turn off pushes for everything or just your app. And you can't control that, and you will never know that happened, which is a good metric to know. If you piss someone off, you'll never know it because Apple doesn't give you a read receipt in that way. If you sent the message and they had that messaging disabled, that's probably going to come, but it's not there now. So you could have sent messages that drove people away and you never knew it. And that's a really sad thing to happen to you, right? Because let's say you do a bad job on your first app, or you do a bad job on your first batch of messaging, and let's say worst case they just deleted the app off your phone, and then you do this great version 2, 3, 4, and it's too late. You're never going to market to be able to get those people back to install your app again. And I would say that's when you do call it a fallback to email, to reach out to those same people and say, we've made a huge change. Maybe this is how you apologize. This is how you get people back, is you're going to go back to the channels you had available to you, which is in most cases email, to talk about getting people to start using your app again. And that's just part of marketing an app, really.
Yeah. I mean, we had that problem with Keyring. I mean, the first, I think, 2 or 3 versions, as we were learning the curve here, there were a lot of mistakes that the company had made. And you could see it in the adoption rates. All of a sudden, it would just slow down, right? And then we released the Android one, and it popped up, and then you would see kind of all of a sudden, you know, in terms of the top 5, top 10, top 20, we were getting really, really low. And we went, there's something going on here. And it turns out, actually, we were getting emails from people saying, why did you make this change? Or this is now not working, or, oh, crud. But then at that point, like I was saying earlier, we had captured some email addresses, so we did the updates. Hey, you know, fixed a bunch of bugs, fixed all this, and then you see it all kind of climbing. But you make a very good point. You know, in mobile, right, this isn't like, you know, email where you get feedback loops and stuff like that, right? What I don't like about Apple, unfortunately, is those controls, those setting controls that you have for you know, all the notifications, that's all out of the operating system. I'd love for them to be able to allow the app developers to also have that control so that when somebody turns it off, it becomes like a feedback loop back to the app developer saying, you just lost somebody.
Yeah, we've done what's called file radar bugs for that. So that's how we get things, that's how you get Apple's attention in that way. So we have all of that in, and we do that on behalf of our customers all the time. So I think we're lucky in that, like, we get to talk to Apple every week about what we're doing, because as a company, we get more than half our business directly from Apple. So that's great for us. But what it means is they like to know what our clients are doing and what they want, and then we're one of the feedback channels for them. So one of the things is today, if you have apps out there and you want feedback channels, just deliver it over to me after, and I'll see what I can do to get it over.
You talked a little bit about feedback loops, and we've said that you don't get notification when somebody uninstalls your app, and you don't get notification when they disable your messaging. But you do get non-delivery messaging, so you know when your messages aren't getting through, and you get a constant stream of activity, so you know who is using your app. So from that, you can start to infer this person probably, either they're just not interested and, you know, they forgot which folder they left the damn thing in on their iPhone, or they have uninstalled my app because they haven't logged in and they haven't touched it for 6 weeks or whatever.
Right.
And similarly, once messages start being refused on a regular basis, kind of like we infer from hard bounces that an address doesn't exist, right, you can tell this person has obviously turned this off because nothing's getting through.
Yeah, I would say just right now, all that data is really terrible and hard to get at.
Right.
Yeah. It's so we're big
Someone
fans.
Someone will probably write a bounce log parser for.
Yeah,
for,
I mean we're
app
big fans of Urban Airship. Because we worked with them on ESPN and right at the beginning, and have worked with them through their product line all the way along, because they're doing that hard work, because they're the ones that do that notification, and they're one of the only ones that actually does it cross-platform to Android and Windows Phone and now connected TVs and stuff too. So I think that's, if you want to get better metrics, you have to go to a third-party provider. Creating that yourself is a non-starter at this point.
So I have a question to you as a developer, right? What is Apple's view on if somebody installs the app, and of course, obviously, you know, they're changing the operating systems and the permissions to get to, you know, certain pieces like the address book. What is Apple's stance on the fact if somebody puts in an app and the app goes, can we send your phone number to the app developer, right? And instead of doing an email, when there's promotions or concerns, maybe being able to send an SMS message to them.
Sure, as long as you message it correctly, they're totally fine.
They are? Okay.
Right, so here's the thing. You need to say why you're doing it.
Right.
You can't be no subterfuge. It has to be really obvious. Anything around contesting, you have to make sure that you state that Apple has nothing to do with your contest. If you want them to use an email address for entering a contest, that's actually one of the ways we do it all the time to gather that. And the other way that we use all the time is saying we need your email address to create an account so we can back up your data back to like your favorites after you buy a new Apple device. So like that's like one of the most obvious ways to get the email address is to do that.
And not subterfuge at all. Right?
No, not at all. It's I'm doing it so I can restore for you. And Apple likes that because that means you're planning ahead for more Apple hardware purchases, right? Which is all they care about. So.
More.
Sorry.
Oh no, were you going to say something? Oh.
I was. So how? I'm trying to think of how this works in with email. We've got an additional channel. Am I leading you here, Derek?
No, I was just going to say, you know what? I've been trying to figure out exactly the same question.
Right.
We have talked a whole bunch, and in preparation for this, we talked a whole bunch about it. And And I would have to say, I'm still not getting very clear on how you tie email and app notifications together. It really became very clear that for people that have apps that are widely used, app notifications rapidly replace SMS. The cost, the capability, SMS, it's kind of a no-brainer. It goes away once you start doing app messaging.
Yeah,
But
for
email
sure.
is much, much more complex and more subtle.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were talking about the other day. It's like, I look at app mail, whatever, what do we call this, app mail? Mail 2.0? I have no idea. Yeah.
I've been going back and forth. App messaging, app notifications is what I've been using. What do you use as an app developer?
Actually, we treat it all as just straight messaging. It's
It's
a
just-
delivery mechanism for your message.
It's just all there is, right?
awesome.
Yeah.
Right, so whether that's a push that spawns a much larger message, which I think if you're looking at like a campaign style, if you have an email that is full of information you want to get out, you turn that into essentially in your app a landing for that content, and you send a push to get people to read it. It's the same as crafting a really awesome subject line in your email marketing. Again, it's probably about the same length, so you could probably reuse that for your push, change it a little bit, but
It's
the point
the-
is
it's the
get them
hook
to
that
open
brings
it,
you in.
right? You want to increase your open rates, and that's one of the things about open rates. I think, like on last when they were talking about, like, seeing fantastic open rates. I mean, push notifications see ridiculously fantastic open rates, right?
Because it's immediate, because once
It's-
it just hits the device, or
Yeah.
are you talking about when they got to slide that message over?
Well, both. So
Oh,
both
okay.
both when your phone is off or locked, and then you get the message that you care about, or more active when it's open and you're just sort of getting them all, right? So there's different open rates for those too.
So where were you going? You were partway through a thought about.
No, I was
about
just going to say,
email.
in terms of our discussions, right? I mean, I look at email and mobile, and again, there's a time to use it, or a time to use one of them and not the other. But you look at email, right? I mean, there are problems with it sometimes, right? You're in the typical SMTP transactions and spam house block list and technical failures, and a lot of us would like to get our emails out immediately, hit send, and everybody get that email within the first 2 minutes. You kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think from my experiences so far, you get that immediate reaction or that immediate delivery with here. You're not dealing with blacklist and blocks and all that kind of problems with the mobile space today.
No, you're not. And I think a great real life example of that is if I'm doing sports, and I think NBA is a great example of that,
Yeah.
which has so much scoring, and people do actually say, send me a push on every scoring play, which is in the NBA is kind of crazy to
Yeah.
do, right? But that happens. And we can do that, and the immediacy of it is that you're right in time with broadcasts, which means that you're getting it to them within 7 seconds consistently every single time, right? So that you match what's happening on broadcast. You don't have that kind of, like with email, you don't have that kind of metric that says everyone's going to get it within 7 seconds, right?
So we had a question.
So I'm thinking of Bank of America. I mean, Bank of America is a great, in my opinion, example where I have an app to be able to quickly check my balance or pay a bill, but I still get emails from them with any kind of, your account, your monthly, whatever, invoices, it's available. So they're definitely using those two different channels where you have an app for quick access, but they email me probably more of those transactional. And then what I'm also wondering is about where their own website notification comes in. Do you see that channel dying? I mean, as more and more, many sites, especially financial sites, have their own message boards within their site itself. So where does that play in when you have a push, you have a push from their web app, then you've got your own inbox for your email, and then they have their website inbox. Where does the website inbox as well fit into all of this?
So as a B of A customer, I mean, I look at the website the website notifications. I get more customer service information there, right? So, hey, you're out of money, or no, whatever it is. But it's something more typically with customer service, and something that's probably more sensitive. I think that's typically where I see that channel in, right? I get alerts, balance alerts, just as well on my phone. But I'm not talking to somebody. I'm not fixing a technical problem with my accounts. I mean, in fact, I'll give you an example. I moved over from Charles Schwab to Merrill Lynch. That's a B of A owned company. There were some problems, and I had to interact with the on-site or the banking center. But then I was interacting more also with customer service through the web app, right? I wasn't doing that through the mobile phone. But I'm getting those notifications again about deposits. Eloquist paid you now, right? I get those there, or I might be checking the balance there.
Yeah, exactly. I think it goes back to strategy, right? Like, so don't assume that you can just like roll your email strategy over into the push notifications. That's not going to work. I think your example is a good one. Like, you have services like Adapt2 and Mint and things like that, that you can see the strategy of what they've done, right? It's so I have set a preference myself that says, here's my budget on coffee for this month, and they're parsing my account and they know when I've blown it, right? So they send that as a push, and they send that as an email in Mint's case, right? To let you know that you've blown a personal limit. And then Mint does like an email summary of what's happening. But all the pushes they have are, you just made a purchase. So they actually assume you're out and doing something. So then it's present. This is better for you now as a push because you just bought something, and likely, and we know that you're not at your address because we have your geolocation. So we know you're out, and we know that the best place to send you this message is to your phone. And we're not going to send it through email because that's just duplication, and you don't need that, right? So the apps can give you that presence, which is something that, again, so immediate in regards to presence that you're not going to get from a traditional email kind of campaign.
Yeah, and I think the airlines have done that very well. I mean, as an American Airlines traveler, I mean, you know, I get like our flight down here, your flight's late. I mean, we're sitting on the plane and my phone's buzzing going, you're going to be 30 minutes late. Well, yeah, I know, I'm on the plane, but they're not advertising through SMS or to that app. I can go into the app now, I can check in for our flight here in a couple of hours, but I'm getting all the marketing and all the offers through email still, right? And they've done a very good job of segmenting and figuring out what channels work best, you know?
And I think we talked about this yesterday. I think you still need to then separate, is this pad or phone, right? Because, again, those are different segments of what's happening, lean back versus lean forward, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely not straightforward, and a lot of people are fumbling through this. So, and because these rules change so fast, we find that when we interact with brands for the first time, they're just woefully, like, unaware of what's happening. And so a lot of it is a schooling that needs to happen, just because, honestly, unless you have someone that's sitting right in this space every day, there's no way you can keep up. It's too dense and too fast.
I think the sort of web-based inbox thing, to come back to your question, my experience has been that the organizations that are using those are the ones where they're concerned about the privacy with regards to email.
Yeah.
So it's financial, it's pharma, those kinds of things, and they use it for a more secure messaging center. Yeah. I think that apps will provide that level of security down the road, that they will be comfortable enough putting that kind of messaging into apps. I suspect it'll take a little while. I'm sure
it's already happening, actually.
From a privacy and financial, from a regulatory standpoint, I'm sure there are still hurdles.
So MobileStorm, which is down in LA, you know, they were, if you will, in the ESP or SMS business, right? They just switched their business model all of a sudden. They went from SMS offers of bars and clubs and, you know, all this kind of cool stuff for the younger crowd. They have literally in the last year went, oh, wait a minute, mobile apps is the place to be, and they've developed a HIPAA compliant, which is the regulation for healthcare, but a HIPAA compliant app, and they're white labeling this thing with health companies that can send their subscribers information, test results through the app.
We're doing that too, and that is something we can do from an app that is, you know, you just don't get that kind of security, and I think you're going to see it in some really crazy scenarios, right? Like, one of the things that has now gone to human trials, which is awesome. We just finished it. It's a chip that gets embedded in your wrist, goes in this vein. It's about the size of a Tic Tac. And your blood goes by it. Glucose on your blood sticks to it.
Does it get notifications?
It does.
It buzzes.
Your phone does. This is the whole point of this thing, is it's for type 1 diabetics, typically teens, 13 to 18, who crash because they're too embarrassed to prick their finger in front of their friends. You put your phone near it, and specifically your iPhone 4S, because it has the tech, and that Bluetooth LE is what powers that device. Wow. It glows, and we measure the glow and get your glucose reading. That spawns pushes to both your doctor and to your parents if you've crashed or you're going to crash, so that they can reach out to you through however way they want. And that is all under a secure channel because of the HIPAA compliance.
Have
That's
a
not
chocolate
fantasy.
bar.
This is real, and this has gone to human trials. Like, this is happening. So,
How long before Coke wants to buy into that? And when you walk by Coke, she goes, "You need some sugar."
yeah,
There you go.
yeah. Oh, like diabetes, and like as an industry is so huge. This data
Oh, yeah.
is going to be worth
Yeah.
a mint, like once it's ready, right?
2 minutes. Sorry, I think I'm just a little,
vision now, don't
a
you?
little discombobulated by all this.
Yeah, my
The
wife was
visions of
really
quite where all
worried when
this
I got
goes,
one
yeah.
put in to test with. She was like, "Don't be doing that. You don't have diabetes." I'm like, "It's awesome. I'm doing it."
Wrist apps. Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you're not getting the push from the thing in your wrist, but the
Now, so maybe to touch a little bit more about from a marketing standpoint. I mean, we've talked a lot about apps and app notifications, and clearly there's a huge role and an enormous amount you can do with them. But when we get back to that marketing thing again, that we keep harping on about because we're marketers, the limitations there seem significant. And we talked a little bit about how 2 years ago everyone was building an app. There seems to be a bit of a backlash against that. I read an article recently that said only 4% of consumers prefer a mobile app to a mobile web for purchasing. How does that change our thinking then? Maybe if we are not a Bank of America or an ESPN, we don't necessarily have people who are just constantly wanting a stream of engaging information, but we do need to market to them. How do those two interact? Is there a situation where it doesn't make sense to use an app, that we should be saying, apps may be cool and hip and everything, but let's do what works rather than what's cool and hip? Have you seen any sort of thinking around that, or is everybody just going, you know what, apps is where it's at still?
I mean, not to harp on or make anybody mad, but I mean, I think you have to do a lot of due diligence to understand whether or not you need this. I mean, guys, I said it actually in Utah. This stuff is hard. You got to work for it. Marketing is hard, and I'm not going to go after the e-pending panel, but you have to do some work to make this stuff happen, right? You got to really do some research and understand whether or not the vertical that you're in really absolutely needs an app. In fact, you got to do some research like you would with any sort of marketing campaign, right? If we are in healthcare and we do, diabetes, is it worth to make an app to do X about diabetes? Maybe it is now. I would have said no 2 minutes ago, but I think you have to go out and look at this and understand whether or not that's going to work. And then I think you have to look at what we just talked about. What sorts of things am I going to do with this? Is it notifications? Is it alerts? Is it, is it going to do anything cool, or is it going to allow me, like with Keyring, to make my life easier and scan my card and redeem my coupons all in one swipe at Tom Thumb? I think we have to look at that kind of stuff.
Well, I think probably we can just like the Airbnb team who couldn't make it here today, like what they talked about in this regard was okay, yes, of course you have to decide if you're going to do an app or not, and it has to be smart enough and don't damage your brand. That's a totally different panel, like about damaging your brand with a bad app. But they were talking about how their user base, because talk about demographics and segments.
Yes.
Their user base absolutely has iPhones. They see 90% of their traffic from iOS. And they see their purchase rate. What did he say? It was really high from iOS, incredibly high. So they made, of their mobile products, 90% of their revenue came from iOS and only 10% from Android, even though they expend kind of the same effort. But that's all, call that new money, right? With Bloomberg, it was the same.
And yet, at the same time, they're taking a different approach to messaging where they're duplicating every in-app message with an email message.
Yep.
And their perspective is that their customers care so much about getting these messages. It's so important that they get them that their customers don't care that they get them duplicated. And yet that some of your users, that's a complete no-no.
Yeah, it just totally depends on your segment. I think the news and aggregators and things like that you're going to be really specific about what you push. And if you miss it, you miss it. If you're talking about a purchase, then yeah, use all your channels. That's you just spent real money. That's something that you need to do in every way that you can and make sure you didn't miss it. Right? But if it is just just marketing or messaging, then no, it's okay if it gets missed, right? And that's a sad thing, but like that's, you have
Just
to deal with it.
marketing?
It's just marketing.
Really?
Yeah. And I say that as a marketer too, so don't worry. But I think that the opportunities that exist with apps versus mobile web and things like that are different. I think we just talked about outside like presence being like amazingly powerful when it comes to mobile web. So with the NHL teams, if corporate tickets go on sale 20 minutes before a game, we do a push to people within, I think it's either 20 or 40 miles, depending on the city, because those people can actually get to the game within that amount of time, and we don't push it to people outside of that radius because they can't do anything about it. So don't send me a message that I can't use. And when you apply that to all of your messaging, you get great open rates because people trust your stuff more. They hear that notification, they will open it because you're not sending them stuff they don't care about. And they always think, that's useful, not, ugh, another notification. Ugh.
So why not the geolocation aspect of that then? Or is that just too much to bear right now in terms of saying, oh, you know what, you're not at home 60 miles away, but you are 10 miles within that limit?
Yeah, that's it. We'd push it to if you're within 10.
Oh, okay. I thought
Yeah.
you were basing on the profile. Sorry.
No, we're
he-
basing
he
on where you
means
are right now.
Real-time location.
Real-time
Yeah.
location.
See, that's- I
So
love that, yeah.
for all of those, we profile everyone. So this is tons of data that you don't normally get. So we take guesses at what's your home, what's your work, where are you, what's your transit. So you can do that, and that's not easy work. And that's why the budgets on a lot of projects we work for are now $1 million plus, which is a shocking thing for a lot of people that are stepping into the app space.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and this has got to scare some of you guys, because a lot of you guys are going, how am I going to deal with an email address, a phone number, and a postal address? And now he's telling you GPS. That's a whole other thing now. You gotta start
We
putting-
talked about the amount of data and the amount of data processing that's involved, and particularly the integration. We work primarily with enterprise organizations, and just processing the data they have today, bringing it into a usable, consistent format in one place is a massive challenge. And yet the amount of data that's coming through now from applications is at least an order of magnitude higher. And then it seems to me that what you can infer, so if you know how long somebody spends at a particular location and what time of day, you can start figuring out what their home address is, even if you're not allowed to ask, and their work address, and a ton of other stuff. You can probably figure out where their sports club is, and an enormous amount. But to do so, you have to be able to process this data in real time, and you have to be able to analyze it effectively and accurately.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that's, you've got to have your stuff together in terms of data.
usually when we launch these things, we're producing way more data than they can use at the beginning. And then those campaigns only really get started once you have enough data to do your aggregates and, you know, throw out your highs and your lows and get, again, because you don't want to piss them off by doing it the wrong way, right?
It's almost sounding to me like with email, like a lot of us will shove off, I say shove off, but we'll partner with email service providers to help us, with the campaigning. There's a similar situation here, I think, with app developing companies, right? I definitely see, it sounds like ExactTarget's doing some stuff around this right now. I've not seen the product, but based on their presentation this week, that they're kind of getting into that model. But it's starting to sound like that there could be a complete niche in this data, storage and your marketing plus app development.
Yeah, I think as we come to wrap up, I think, it's very clear. If you're going to get into app messaging, don't do it yourself.
Yeah.
Use a third party. If you're going to get into app development, unless
Don't do
you
that
happen
yourself
to
either.
be a huge development organization, you don't want to be doing that yourself either.
Right.
Yeah.
And then use Trustee for privacy.
Mhm. Okay. Did we have time for questions?
We can take, I
Did
think
we
can
have any
take one.
questions?
We had a couple questions, but
But they left.
They fell asleep somewhere in the
yeah,
corner.
you have a question. All right.
Damien from Pulse Point. Do you have any stats on what percentage of app users have both push notifications turned on and also location services turned on?
That depends on the app, right? So we find publications, the geolocation tends to be quite low. So because you get that ask, like you have to be special with that ask, or be careful with that ask, right? Which is we would never develop an app where it opens and then the first thing it says is, can I use your location? We actually wait till you do something so that you know why we're doing it, and that's a huge mistake that most apps make. So even in publications, like with the Canadian newspapers, we did a stories around me, and until you actually went there, we didn't ask for your location. So I would say it's like with the ESPNs and things like that, like the sort of flagship applications, it's 80% plus. With smaller applications, which are niche, like our things in healthcare, it's way lower. Unless the reason for your app is to use the location, in which case you're doing all the marketing and your app is saying, basically, I need your location to function, right? So when we do an app for caregivers that take care of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, location's a big deal, as opposed to reading a story about Kim Kardashian this week. Like, you don't need my location for that. So it varies widely based on how good your messaging and your marketing is why you need it. And so it's just like all your other marketing, you have to, in a sense, beg for it and prove that you need it.
So I would love to see some sort of best common practices document like we have for email, right? You know, we all have calendars and business processes in which we say, okay, new campaign for email. We need to do this and this and this at this time and this at this time. You know, and we've all written documents on this, and every ESP's got one too. I'd love to see something like that, because I didn't even think about that in terms of, don't ask for location immediately when they install it, but it's during the action that really requires it.
The first time you favorite, for example. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I suspect those will come, and they'll mirror what we've seen with email. It's the same thing with profiles, right? Don't ask people for a ton of information that you don't have a valid and clear purpose for. Because they'll lie to you or not give it to you. And
I think that's reflected in Apple's rules, right? I think that's very clearly reflected in Apple's rules. So that's
the stakes on it with apps are higher, though, because, of course, you can ask again for profile information. You can't necessarily ask again to turn on notifications.
Right.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, I know there's a lot here. I appreciate you for taking on a big topic, and it's one that, you know, I know I'm interested in, just trying to absorb it all. But I want to thank you guys for tackling it, for stepping in, for telling us how this stuff all works. So thank you guys very much.